about to start. And we needed one more person to be able to actually do anything. Come on. You are the star of the show today. Good morning. Andy Barnett. I'm the chair of the Affordable Housing Advisory Committee. Welcome to our January 2024 meeting, first meeting of the new year. Affordable Housing Advisory Committee is a 13-person committee whose primary function is to advise city leadership about affordable housing policy issues and priorities for city funding. We work with the Housing and Community Development Committee of City Council to forward our recommendations to the full City Council. All committee members and staff are participating in person, although we are streaming live on the Virtual Engagement Hub, accessible through the Virtual Engagement Hub link on the city website, and also linked from our committee page. You can also watch the meeting on YouTube, either live or recorded. You can listen into the meeting by phone at 855-925-2801. Code 7663. We'll take public comment at the end of the meeting. Also accept comments by email or voicemail if they are received by 5 p.m. the day before the meeting. All right, now on to roll call. And at some point I need to put the new committee members on my cheat sheet so that I can do the roll call, but I will do it right here off of our agenda. So. Brian Methvin is our co-chair, is not, or vice chair is not here. Scott Adams.
Here.
David Bartholomew. Here. Jane Kristen.
Here.
Chris Day.
Here.
Paul Heathman is away. Tara Irby is also away. Rita Lee.
Here.
Babs Phillip is not with us today. Nuena Smith is also not here. And Stuart Zeiton.
Here.
All right. That said, we do have a quorum for this meeting, but just barely. Thanks for squeaking in under the wire, Rita, to get us to quorum. Our first agenda item is to approve the minutes from our last meeting, and I want to thank everybody for the great work in our longer December work session. It was a really great meeting, but can we get a motion second on the meeting minutes from that work session?
I'll make a motion.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right. We are going to take today's meeting in a slightly different order. We have been arranging and rearranging this agenda to accommodate a presentation from the planning team about the missing middle study. And just like with some of our committee members, we've got some people who are gone or sick or dealing with other things. So really grateful for Chris Collins to jump in at the last minute to do that, to do this presentation. And we'd like to move that to the beginning of our meeting. So I don't know, do we need to, we don't ever vote to approve the agenda anyway, so we might as well just let it roll. Chris, come and tell us all about the missing middle housing study.
Absolutely. Let me switch screens here. All right. Good morning. I'm Chris Collins of the Planning and Urban Design Department. And you see a presentation in front of you. This is not City Council. I am not Vidila Satvica. But the presentation is current and should be good information for you. I am filling in, so I will do my best to answer everything. I'm pretty close to the project anyway, so should work out. This is a report that's based on the final missing middle housing study report that was issued, and actually is the same report that City Council will see this morning at 11. So this is the most current info. So first off, we'll start with the key takeaways. Looking at the fact that Asheville has a significant housing crisis, this group obviously knows this, and the missing middle housing, you all see me stumble over that a few times. I've said it 100 times, but I can't get it out of my mouth correctly. We're looking to provide guidance and update policy regulations. We're looking to move the focus away, or the recommendations we're seeing to move the focus away from single-family home or single-unit home production, as it may not suffice to address the housing shortage. And we have come out of the study with 43 recommendations, a lot, and 14 anti-displacement strategies to consider. So we're going to be taking a look at not every one of those today, but talking about some of them. And implementation of the missing middle housing study, we'll dive into that a little bit, and our first thoughts on how we might implement this to increase housing opportunity and provide more diverse housing options. All right, so we're going to look at what is the housing problem, what is missing middle housing, what can missing middle housing provide for Asheville, conclusions of the study, and like I said, implementation. All right, what is the housing problem? Some pretty pictures of Asheville. We live in a beautiful place. There we go.
And Chris, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I will say that Dylan was here 2 months ago, so don't feel like.
Okay, great.
They did hear the first.
You saw
I
the
think
first part,
of the
right.
story.
So
Is that
let me
correct?
kind of go through these quickly. The housing problem, I'm speaking with the Affordable Housing Advisory Committee. You all are well versed in this. This graph shows you the increase in median home sale price. Missing middle housing, of course, there's some examples: live-work units, cottage court developments, duplexes, fourplexes, and so on. We're just talking really about not giant apartment complexes and not single-unit homes, right? Again, those are some historical examples from Asheville of missing middle housing types. More? All right, so of course, we're looking, and you've seen a lot of this, we're looking to provide housing choice, aging in place, efficient use of land, incremental growth, compatible scale of housing. And that map has always been interesting to me. Missing middle housing is permitted in 66% of the city, which is more than half, but not that great of a deal. We'll stop for questions again once we've done some more substance. All right, so the main point that we're coming from the study is that more single detached housing will not solve the problem. So policy guidance that we're getting is, you heard me say it several times already, fewer new single detached units and more missing middle housing choices. And we also already knew coming to this, but we've had it reinforced through the study that some parts of the city have populations that are more vulnerable to change and housing pressures. So the study does address that too, based on several factors such as income, race, education, housing tenure. It does go a little deeper into infrastructure and walkability of neighborhoods, because of course that impacts housing affordability as well. As I mentioned, we came out of this with 43 recommendations for policy, zoning, and implementation categories. That does not fit well on a slide, and it would take us a really long time to dig through all of those right now. So these are some examples in front of you right now, and they include policy recommendations broadly, such as reinforcing walkable environments, preserving neighborhood character, reviewing and clarifying next steps for corridors with transformational potential. And there actually has done some analysis out of the study to try and identify those places that may not be served by the infrastructure we're looking for by missing middle housing now, but have that real opportunity moving forward. Of course, we've seen some zoning recommendations come out of this. We all anticipated that. And implementation recommendations, how to move this forward. All right, any questions yet?
I'm curious I'm curious, in that list on the previous slide, one of the policy recommendations is preserving existing neighborhood character. Seems a little bit at odds with the goal of trying to create change in the landscape. I'm wondering just kind of what's been the conversation around, how are you defining existing neighborhood character and, as it relates to the potential for a change in land use?
Right, and we've heard this a lot in our engagement around missing middle housing and items related to it as well, about people concerned about what they've defined as their neighborhood character, what they see as their neighborhood character. I think really what you're looking at here is finding zoning strategies to help mitigate the impact on neighborhood character. Things like orientation to the street, building entrances. I'm throwing things out here. I'm not saying these will necessarily be in the final cut. Driveway locations, parking, things like that. Things that really have an impact on that visual neighborhood character. Obviously, if you're adding more units to a neighborhood, some people are going to perceive that that is negatively impacting their neighborhood character. But this is looking for strategies to mitigate that impact or lessen that impact.
Right, so, yeah, sorry.
Oh, you're fine.
No,
Please.
Like, so our consultants, you'd hear them say sometimes, just because a building has a bunch of units in it doesn't make it missing middle.
Yeah.
Like, that's not, you know what I mean? Like, so there are some ugly examples of what missing middle is in our community, right? And it turns people off to it, and they think it all must be that way. So part of this is really understanding what we're trying to get to, which is part of what you're.
Yeah, and I breezed through some of those slides that had pictures of things that are in the community now, but they were kind of good examples of something that fits a neighborhood character, right? Once we get to a unit count, there can even be architectural style things. You got to balance that because that starts to increase the cost of building too. So it's a lot at play.
Scott, were you going to jump in?
I'll hold my comment, thanks.
All right, let's talk about implementation. First step really is to establish a small implementation team led by staff. And the goal is for that to represent, well, everything, right? That's always the goal. But a few tenets of that representation would be neighborhoods, nonprofits, the development industry, affordable housing, not advocacy, but experts advocacy, things like that, trees and environment, legacy communities, and planning and zoning. We have a pretty representative task force put together now, and we're working on what the best method is to assemble this team. Then we're looking at prioritizing a package of recommendations from the study, and these are just kind of, this may include, this may not include. We don't have that committee together yet, so these are representative. Things such as allowing ADUs more broadly, diversifying that housing type, more units on parcels, prioritizing zoning updates in the most appropriate areas. Again, we don't know what that is yet. We have the maps, we have the studies on displacement risks. We have to figure out how that's applied and what those anti-displacement strategies are, but that is a factor. Incentivizing smaller units to encourage attainability. One thing you'll see throughout the report, and one thing that was apparent to me, a lot of these things are more affordable because they're smaller, right? And that's, I guess that's the market, but that is a reality we need to look at. Reduce or eliminate or modify in some way off-street parking requirements. Establishing maximum lot coverage and footprint standards, revising driveway standards, updating sidewalk regulations, and as we talked about, orient homes to preserve neighborhood patterns. A lot of these are aimed at reducing the cost of the final housing product, right? Reducing the cost of construction of these housing types. We do want to continue longer-term communication, community discussions, and public engagement. And some of the things we do plan on doing are things we've already been doing, but continuing virtual and neighborhood meetings, informational videos. Those are out there now on YouTube. There may be more to come. Definitely some surveys to gather wider input on how this gets implemented, open house sessions, and always open to other ideas as well, how to connect with the community, help people understand the study that's out there. Hopefully let us roll into implementation ideas as we work with council, PED, this group, all of our stakeholders. Help provide a base level education about what the study's saying and what the next steps are, because we don't want it to cause a lot of anxiety as we haven't even arrived at any recommendations yet. This schedule is, I don't take it super seriously yet. This is put down, but I can tell you our goal is in January to establish that implementation team that I mentioned. And then we are supposed to be working, or going to be working with the Planning and Economic Development Council Committee on a regular basis to game plan this. We'll be with them less often than our implementation team. draft package of changes, March and April, with boards and commissions. I wouldn't be surprised if you don't see that in March and April. We'll aim high, but we want to take this at a pace that allows us to engage the communities and come out with a product that works. And beyond that, obviously, the next steps are Planning and Zoning Commission and City Council. So really, that'll be driven with how long does it take to produce appropriate, well-communicated and engaged draft recommendations. All right, we went over this slide. And I'll take any questions on the whole thing you have now.
And if I could just add
Yeah,
one thing,
please.
for that small implementation group, the affordable housing seat, I think Vidila, Stephanie, and I talked about that being somebody from AHAC. Is that, I don't know if that's formalized yet,
I believe it is now.
but just so you all know,
Yeah.
that's kind of a,
Yeah, I think that's kind of the goal. That's why I mentioned that current team, right?
Right.
Kind of the makeup of that. I think it'll be a smaller team. We're still working on implementing and what it looks like, but yeah.
A question on the smaller implementation team. Are there, I guess, I mean, three things come to mind, fire, water, and sewer. Are there plans to have representatives from those relevant agencies or disciplines?
What we don't know yet, and the reason we don't know yet is because we have a tool, the Technical Review Committee, if you're familiar with, that makes up all of our technical reviewers in the city of Asheville. And it's about when do we want to feed that technical discipline into it. We could get some draft recommendations ready and take them through the Technical Review Committee for that advice, or we could pull somebody into that smaller committee. I know that sometimes when we get into the details like that, it can kind of, we're working with broader picture ideas at that point. It's a good point. It needs to happen. We're just not sure at what point it'll feed in, so.
Okay.
I think part of the idea is not making it too unwieldy.
Yeah,
Sure.
exactly.
Smaller,
Yeah.
being a little bit more nimble, and being able to,
But we also don't want to take things forward to council and the community that aren't feasible, so, yeah.
Right. I mean, it's just something in reading through the report and being on the advisory working group and just knowing some sort of, potential fatal flaws or red flags. Oftentimes it's, either infrastructure or fire or things that are ostensibly non-zoning but very much factor into it.
Yes.
So it's just a quick comment
Absolutely.
on that.
They can definitely be project killers, so, yep.
I'm sorry, I'm a little new to this. What's
you're
a
fine.
legacy community?
So our legacy communities are older. You know what, I can't answer this, Sasha, but I bet you have a better answer than me.
Legacy neighborhoods actually are self-identified, actually.
Yeah.
I'd say 4 or 5 years ago, they're generally historically black neighborhoods. Emma is also included in that list. So there's a Legacy Neighborhood Coalition, and it's made up of Burton Street, South Side, East End Valley Street, Emma Community, and Shiloh, thank you. I always forget one. But it's definitely not all the historic black communities. I mean, there are communities that are, are older, or also old, but aren't as active or, intact.
Got to see you moving the mic
I know.
up.
No, sorry. I'll move it away when I'm thinking.
Okay. Other questions for Chris? One of the things I noticed in the reading through the study, it referenced several communities that have already taken steps down this road. But what I didn't see in that study was any learnings from those communities, particularly around unintended consequences, or what effect has this had on, let's say, property tax values, or sort of down the road, who ultimately ends up benefiting and not benefiting
Sure.
from this kind of zoning change. Is there a plan to look at some of those things? Maybe these changes in other cities, are too recent to actually have any research on that.
That's probably part of it. I will say that the study didn't really address the down-the-road findings from those communities they've worked with or the consultant had worked with and things like that. Myself and Vadilla and several people, we've dug into communities that have done this, everything from down the road in Greensboro all the way to like success stories from New Zealand, because we're trying to find where this works and how it works. One thing, it is new, so it's a new concept. It's an old housing type, but a new concept, right? One thing we haven't seen is immediate explosions of missing middle housing types coming from it. I think as changes and impacts come, they're going to be more gradual. The market has to respond. The changes have to be appropriate and right, and they are small and strategic. We have to hit the right parts of our zoning ordinance, our standards and details, and find out really how to incentivize it if we want it to work. So it's kind of a long answer to say we've looked at it. We haven't seen anything what we would call a failure or a wild success at this point. I mentioned New Zealand because that's mentioned in a lot of places. I can't remember the city.
Auckland.
Was it Auckland? Yeah.
Mm-hmm. It's the largest
Where
city.
they've had some success, where they've seen some of this actually be developing, and we'll be looking at that as we develop individual recommendations, right, from those strategies. What is it going to be? What is the zoning change? Is it a new base zoning layer? Well, what have communities done that's worked and not worked in those layers? So we'll try and learn from their mistakes and successes, but yeah, it's not a real deep pool of results yet.
Is there, one of the tasks for the implementation team that you shared was to prioritize which zoning districts to begin with and those sorts of things. Has there been or will there be work to identify where there is potential available land for kind of immediate redevelopment? I mean, is that part of the overlay to think about, like, are we going to do this first where we're most likely to see the greatest number of units created as a result of zoning, or are there other factors?
There are a lot of factors. So part of it, and I flip back to this map, we're going to analyze the maps that tell us things that are areas that are vulnerable to change, vulnerable to displacement. But there's a greater map, too, that kind of combines that with what it calls missing middle housing ready areas, right? You may have seen that one. And really that's taking into account, is the infrastructure there for the missing middle housing? If you do things like reduce parking, do we have sidewalks? Do we have transit? Things like that to counterbalance it. So we feel like this will be a good tool that we haven't drawn the conclusion yet on what does it mean, right? It could mean a lot of things. We could implement it. It could be citywide, targeted areas, whatever. We have a lot of options, and we really need to find the right anti-displacement tool, but also the right tools to, like you said, identify those areas that may come up first, right? If there are a lot of infrastructure costs in the area, that might reduce the developer's willingness to build that missing middle product. So if we already have sidewalks, we already have sufficient streets in an area and things like that, we know not all of Asheville has those things. It might be a primer target, but those are all factors that are going to be taken into account, as well as the anti-displacement strategies, so that we're not unintentionally causing any harm to communities or neighborhoods.
I'm sorry, I'm just going to keep asking questions until somebody else comes in. Is there bandwidth currently, or additional anticipated bandwidth within the planning team to work with neighborhoods and potential development to sort of bridge this concern around what is or isn't the character of the neighborhood? I mean, is there room to sort of early pilot projects using missing middle zoning changes to kind of have the planning team serve in a more consulting sort of role to bridge that or facilitate that, or is that this is probably all the kind of thing that the implementation team is going to be thinking about and hasn't been thought about yet. But is that anticipated, or is it already in place?
Probably, it's not already in place, right? It's probably something that could be anticipated. It's a good idea. I think what you're saying is,
Are we
Well,
getting
I hear
another
a couple-
consultant or?
yeah, I mean, the plan is to try and do this in-house. A lot of money was spent on the study.
Right.
Want to be good stewards of funds, and we have some really talented people on staff that can help get this across the finish line. As far as, it really depends on what those implementation recommendations look like, right? If there's a way to pilot something, that's a lovely idea. It'd be a great way to test it out and see. In my mind right now, I'm not kind of putting together how to do that,
Yeah.
but if there's a way, that's a great idea. Yeah.
Yeah, we've been talking about it. I mean, I guess another way to say it, we've been talking about it and it hasn't been decided yet. But I mean, I
Yeah.
think there's definitely a recognition that more work needs to be done with
Yep.
folks in neighborhoods. And I don't know if I'd call them an implementation team. Just let's be careful of that language.
It's a good idea.
They're not
Yep.
in charge of the implementation.
Right.
But
Advisory
Well,
or, yeah.
I'm
they're
sorry, that was the
advising,
language
they're
that was
advising
used.
staff.
Yeah, no, you're
on
fine.
Implementation, and I think that phase one, if you notice that language, phase one, it's kind of like, what are the first phase is gonna be smaller, easier, more acceptable changes that maybe don't trigger some of these fears, and that gives us a little bit more time to do some of that work. But it hasn't been flushed out, like
That's
what
a
that
really,
looks
it's
like.
it's a really good point, that phase one looks like what requires less time and effort to do, and what's going to be the long haul to make sure we do it right.
Yeah. We're,
I mean, I think.
I was just going to say is Vidilla continuing to champion this through? Just not have the same, learn from the open space implementation process that drug on for
Yes.
entirely too
Exactly.
long.
and urban centers too.
Right.
I shouldn't even say that.
I don't have the answer there, but just kind of stating the obvious of trying to stay anywhere
Yeah.
close to a timeline like that.
I feel like that's on our minds, and that's kind of where this phased approach is coming in. Because
Right.
we know there are going to be things that are quicker and easier to grab and implement and start getting on the ground, whether they're zoning related or policy related or housing. But that's why we're saying maybe put off the things that are going to require, not put them off, but give sufficient time to the things that need extra engagement, extra committee time, things like that. So that we get that phase two done right, but we don't slow down the whole project.
Is this something that almost, that almost is like the comprehensive plan, where as changes are being proposed in development, this is a document that's being referred to as well under consideration, or is it?
It's not being adopted like a comprehensive
Yeah.
plan, but, I mean, it is kind of a guiding document, maybe.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I can see us as staff referring back to us for things that we also, I mean, like Sasha said, it's not adopted, so we're not going to officially write it up and be like, this is not in conformance with. But we're going to look at it when we review things and when we review future changes. Because if we're going to do all these changes, we don't want to undo it with something else, right? Yeah.
Was just curious, so thinking about the schedule that you had outlined, are there plans for like points of reiteration and like as learnings are brought forth or as you're garnering feedback from these different groups, whether it be the neighborhoods or the developers, owner operators, that there will be that iterative process baked into this, whether it be with regards to zoning and if something doesn't work, making a change that it does work, or like with financing policies and incentives like you were talking about, if it doesn't work, making tweaks and changes. Are there plans for those iterations and reiterations?
Kind of like a feedback cycle.
Yeah.
Like, let's see how this is working. Let's be willing to go back and change it. Yeah, that should be the goal with any change, right? I'm not saying it always happens, but that should always be part of the goal moving forward, is a periodic kind of audit of what we're doing. Referring back to the previous question about how long does this take to see results, I think it takes a little while from what we're seeing from other communities. So establishing what that schedule of kind of auditing this thing would be is something we'd have to do.
I'll just make a quick comment. Having been on the advisory working group and having read through all 155 pages and having seen a lot of other studies, across the country and, to your point, the world, I mean, I think one of the biggest core discussions for the community is to have a discussion about zoning as it relates to use and form. Form, what it looks like; use, what it's being used for. And I think one of the main cores of this, or it's an open discussion, is how agnostic or dogmatic does the community want to be on use? If it's just wanting to be more agnostic about this is a residential use and that could take many different forms, that's something that I think is kind of a central theme of the study of getting away from the fixation on just having a certain kind of form only in a given residential district. So basically, the idea of a general residential zoning district where you could have anything from an ADU up to a certain size small apartment building. That's kind of the general thinking on a lot of these studies. So.
Absolutely, yeah. And that speaks to what we talked about. I try not to use the word character, even though it was in the presentation.
Sure,
because it's
sure.
so hard to define. But what communities define as their development pattern, let's call it that, and trying to make this contextual to that.
And it's, I mean, yeah, any discussion of character is also going to focus on what's existing and what was in the past and what are you trying to build for the future. I think that's a part of the conversation that sometimes gets lost is what about the future? What about
Right.
Your kids or people that haven't moved here yet or whatever else, so.
I mean, I think in a nutshell, what the conversation around this committee has been on this is, obviously in places where large single-family homes are the norm or exclusively what's allowed, these changes create an opportunity for some different unit types that could drive affordability. And so from that standpoint, like, this seems like a win for affordability. On the other hand, in places where we have naturally occurring affordable housing and maybe lower property values, upzoning those areas and creating the opportunity for maybe more profitable land use, creates the potential for displacement. And so,
Yes.
That for us is the balance as we think about the work of the Affordable Housing Committee. How do we maximize the affordable housing upside from these kind of changes and mitigate the potential loss of naturally occurring affordable housing or displacement. And so I think I speak for this whole committee that we really want to be a partner to this effort to make sure that those things happen, hand in glove. And so are there things other than having someone on this implementation and advisory planning team?
Yeah.
Are
We'll
there
get a
other
good
ways
name
that
for
we
it.
can support
Yeah.
this work and support this work being done in a way that that maximizes affordability and minimizes the potential loss of naturally occurring affordability?
Yeah, I'm sure there are. And I one of these slides, we talked about just draft package of changes with boards or commissions. Certain boards and commissions may see things before a draft package is ready. And I would anticipate this group being some place that we may come again to get some feedback. That specific schedule hasn't been worked out yet. And, when other media goes out, surveys and things like that, of course, we can use all the advocacy we can get to get responses to those things from the community. So that's just kind of another asterisk on there.
Is it worth it for us to try to tackle some of the non-zoning anti-displacement strategies that are included in this report and sort of our work plan for the year and advocating for adoption of those kinds of policies.
Well, so this is where the affordable housing plan
Yeah,
comes
that's
in,
what I was-
right? So, and I even had a discussion with our consultant yesterday about making sure that we're making all these things, we've talked about it before, it's nothing new, but making sure all these things are talking to each other.
Yeah.
So the missing middle study had, I think it narrowed it down to, I think, 14 primary anti-displacement strategies. Some are zoning, some are like more funding, things that we talk about in this committee more. And I think those have different paths of approval, right? The affordable housing plan, the reason, I think that's going to be such a primary document for our work, and it's supposed to include anti-displacement, and it's also coming out with a strategy for the bond, and a lot of that non-zoning anti-displacement work requires money, and we don't have any money for that unless we have a bond. So I kind of feel like that's where they all get married, and so I think maybe, I haven't really thought this through, so I'm talking this off the top of my head. I mean, maybe it's worth it for this committee to really get acquainted with those strategies, and then through the input process with the plan, really help talk about that and process it. I mean, maybe this is like a processing kind of.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just thinking
Brain
about things
trust.
like eviction mitigation, tenant education, those kinds of things that would be anti-displacement strategies. They're not bond fundable because they're not capital, they're not land use.
Right.
So we just kind of have to get this all synced up right so that the strategies to defend against what we don't want are in place before. I mean, it would be very easy to, have all of that written into plan, move forward with a bond that gives us money for, bricks and mortar development that's now synced up with the ability to, to build in a more dense way. And all of a sudden we got money to build, we've got the ability to build in a different way, and those things go forward without this other piece that isn't funded. So to your point about, needing all of these things to mesh together, they need to also mesh together with funding sources to make them happen.
Absolutely.
And we can't, two of the three seem like they're on a faster track than the third. So in terms of those like person-based anti-displacement strategies. That's the only
Maybe
thing.
we could spend some time talking here about that.
Absolutely.
Any other questions? Thoughts for Chris? Babs, Rita? Stuart?
So when you all leave here, we have council briefings are always the Thursday before the Tuesday of council. So you can go to your office or your home or wherever, and you can curl up and watch council on YouTube if you want. And there'll be another reiteration of this.
Yes.
If you want to see, and you might, or you can watch it on the weekend, whatever, it's recorded. So, but you would get the benefit of seeing the council discussion. I mean, it'll
Sure.
only be one part of their meeting, right? So, but we can get the timestamps for that and send that out for you all if you want to see the council discussion. I think
That'd be
that's a
helpful.
worthy.
And David's hosting the watch party. All right, thank you so much, Chris. I know this was, you were, third string on this
Oh,
at
no
the last
worries.
minute, but you did a great job. And
Thank you for your time and
sorry for grilling you with so many
trying
questions.
to get your agenda back up. All right. And thank you very much. Y'all have a good day.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. It's fine.
All right, diving back into to our agenda, I want to circle back around to our retreat and what came out of the retreat, and particularly our report, our annual report to City Council, and have a brief discussion about that. So any other thoughts, reflections on our retreat? I'm gonna start calling it a work session anytime that there's not, like aromatherapy involved. It's not a retreat. So our work session in December, any thoughts, reflections on that, on our time together, or on what came out of that was in your packet, other than what's in the annual report to council?
And I just wanted to let you all know, there are documents in here, if you haven't had a chance to look, that Hunter did a great job of capturing all the sticky notes that you all worked on. And there was also the draft list of accomplishments, and I felt like there was one more thing. But yes, they're all in this. In the annual report, you all have your laptop, so it's there under number 5 in your
We'll pull that up in
materials.
just a second, and that's got
Okay.
the list of accomplishments and our policy recommendations and our work plan topics for the year. But any other thoughts about our time together in December?
I'd say I enjoyed the icebreaker exercise, but especially getting to know a couple of new members, so appreciated that.
Yeah. Nice to have a little bit of time to be a little less formal. Well, let's move on to our the draft of our report to council. Obviously, we put this together once a year in advance of the council's work session. I don't know if folks want to just pull it up on their screen. We can pull it up, I guess, here as well. Hunter, while you're in front of us, thanks for putting the graphics together that were in our packet from the December retreat. That was fantastic.
Thank you.
And I hope you were able to get all of the sticky notes and everything up off your floor and
I put them on Sasha's wall, actually. Yeah, so every,
They're slowly falling down.
All right, so in our report to council, obviously, we're listing the things that we did last year, which we went through at the retreat. I don't know if there were any additional accomplishments that you'd like to include here, other than the 12 that are listed.
Just make
Number-
a quick comment on number 11.
Yeah.
I think it might just be a slight typo. I think it's finishing with source of income discrimination. Is that the
Yes.
term?
Yes, that's a great catch. We don't want to prevent source of income. All the sources of income we can possibly.
Fair enough.
Anything else on our accomplishments? Again, a good reflection of a good year's worth of work. We can scroll on down to our policy recommendations, and we left our work session in December with kind of a rough outline of these policy recommendations, and then Jane and Paul and David and Noena worked to kind of flesh them out a little bit, and I want to acknowledge my gratitude to the 4 of you for doing that work on behalf of the whole committee. So here they are, and Jane, I'm going to let you walk through what that small working group put together that's here in front of us, and give the committee a chance to ask any questions or make any changes before we vote to approve these.
Great. Yeah, and David, if I miss anything, please feel free to color in as well. But the first one is really focusing on the approval of the affordable housing plan for this year, wanting to make sure that there's proactive allocation of both resources and council agenda time to make sure that there's support and funding for the implementation of this plan. We want to continue to be involved and consulted throughout the enterprise report development process. For the second one, I just wanted to highlight and underscore that it's very important to attract and retain adequate city staff to ensure that the housing goals are achieved, especially focusing on enforcement of terms, conditions, and assigned fees of contracts that are awarded under the various programs within Asheville, so focusing on the Housing Trust Fund, the LUIJ, the conditional zoning, and also making sure that there is that ongoing compliance with these affordable housing subsidies to make sure that public funds are used appropriately. For the third one, AHAC encourages City Council to seek approval from the North Carolina Local Government Commission for a general bond referendum to increase the supply of safe, affordable housing for residents of low and moderate income. This was just really reiterating our support for any sort of seeking of a bond in kind of a thoughtful manner, not assuming that one will be sought, but underscoring that we do support it if it moves forward. For the fourth one, further expanding any qualifications and scoring criteria for all local investments of affordable housing. So again, housing trust fund, city-owned land, bond funds, et cetera. And prohibit source of income discrimination to promote better acceptance of HUD, housing choice vouchers, and also VASH vouchers, and any other forms of tenant-based rental assistance. I'll pause there. Anything you wanted to add, David?
No, just thank you so much for putting the original draft together.
Yeah.
That was great.
Yeah. Thanks for the help and comments.
To the rest of the committee, do these feel like they capture what we would recommend that council focus on as affordable housing policy goals?
I guess just as a reminder, these did stem from our working session where we had all kind of verbally produced just quick notes on a board, and so this is kind of what came out of that, just a little more fluff and eloquent language.
All right. No discussion, no questions? We nailed it the first time out of the gate.
Unfortunately, I was not able to be at the working session, but just reading this and thinking through this past year and the conversations we've had, I feel like this has done a great job of capturing those suggested recommendations for policy. So thank you, guys.
Yeah. And then finally, looking at the last section of this document, sort of outlines what we're thinking about for our work plan for the coming year. You'll see 5 things there. Again, this came out of discussions that we had in December and things that have been kind of rolling along with us over the past year or so. One is really just wanting to make sure that I think it's really easy for this group, especially with the incredible staff support we received from Sasha, to kind of focus primarily on our local affordable housing funding streams and programs, but acknowledging that, like the presentation we just saw from planning and zoning, that lots of other places, planning and zoning, development services, our federal programs, all of those things affect affordable housing at the local level. So just wanting to increase the exposure that this committee has to those areas. The affordable housing plan is the reason that this committee exists in our charter, and so making sure that happens successfully, and that we're doing our job as outlined in the charter to make sure that that becomes a tangible, actionable plan. As we recognized before, kind of helping to achieve the balance of affordability impacts around whatever comes out of the missing middle recommendations that we heard this morning. And again, really specifically focusing on those anti-displacement strategies that may not otherwise have kind of an easy way to gain visibility.
A quick question on these. So on items 4 and 5, so item 4 on city-owned property and item 5, recommendations from the Community Reparations Commission's Housing Impact Focus Area. I guess it's a question to city staff. In terms of city-owned properties, is there any, I'm going to maybe phrase this well or not, is there sort of a 2-track thought process on that of city-owned properties that were not acquired through urban renewal and making that a faster track to development versus city-owned properties that were acquired through urban renewal, which is very much intertwined with the discussion of the reparations commission and whatnot.
Yes, and I think, yes, there's really not a lot of land left over from urban renewal. I mean, it's less than 5 acres.
Hmm.
That's not occupied by a city facility, or, a lot of land was sold off
Mhm.
in the 80s and 90s. So I think the Housing IFA and the Reparations Commission are not focused on those 4 acres. Right? I mean, they're focused on the big picture.
Right.
So there's 2 tracks in terms of, we're not doing anything with that formerly urban renewal land.
Right.
Until there's a recommendation from reparations or a policy direction from council. But we have much bigger pieces of land that aren't associated with urban renewal, and they're not all slated for affordable housing.
Right.
And staff has been working hard on a plan to bring forward, and that will be happening in this new year. I'm not sure if it goes to PEDA and HCD. I'm involved, but I'm only marginally because of my time. But we have 40 acres out in the Deaver Review community. We've got a big piece of land next to the transit station on Cox. It's actually on Ashland Avenue.
Mhm.
So it's a strategy around like the bigger pieces of land.
Sure, sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was just wanting to clarify that. I think, at least in my quick read, there's obviously the discussion around city-owned properties that were acquired through urban renewal, and that's, very much an ongoing discussion. But to your point, maybe it's not as, I guess, land-wise as much of a potential impact for other uses as
Yes.
the other however many
Correct.
acres.
Yeah. And definitely just to reiterate, like the Reparations Commission members, and I go to as many Housing IFA meetings as I can because they're often on council nights, but
Hmm.
they are focused on kind of the big picture. Like
Right.
we lost this many acres, and we would like to see a return of some of that back, or some kind of, How do you make the community whole? From
Sure.
that? Yeah.
Thanks.
So, sure.
Any other thoughts, questions on these as our kind of 5 work plan items for the coming year? Obviously, they'll need to be fleshed out in terms of what each one of, what the work is to achieve each of these areas, but do these feel like the 5 things that we want to do?
These do seem reasonable, yes.
Yeah, I think they look appropriate.
On just a quick clarification question on item number 1, strengthening AHAC's role in providing affordable housing perspective, et cetera, has there been any discussion to date of including AHAC as part of the technical review committee? Just for comparison, the Urban Forestry Commission has a seat on it, but obviously it's a different structure of sorts.
No, there
Okay.
hasn't. I mean, that could potentially put us, there may be some legal issues with that, really.
Just asking the question.
Yeah, no, it hasn't been.
Okay.
I also think now that there's an urban forester with the planning department, they're planning on changing that setup.
Okay.
Nobody can hear you.
Yeah, there might not necessarily be a member of the public with the responsibility of serving on technical review.
Right.
I know it
Given that there's now a professional staff person
Yeah.
to fill that role.
I think these are great goals. I am interested to see if we're going to have some of this on the agenda, the fleshing out of it, especially I think with one. I don't know if that's part of the work plan or part of your plan for February meeting or the March meeting, but how are we going to strengthen our ability to be advocates and clearly understand our role as a body and how we're going to support the changes. I mean, it seems like a very big year for our community with affordable housing plan. I'm interested in how, like, the details of how we're going to do that.
Pull it a little closer.
Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, David, I think that is a great suggestion. I was working on a new version of my really colorful, work plan spreadsheet that we did last year, and for this meeting, that would kind of drill into those, lower level actions and when they would happen in the course of our meeting schedule. And quite frankly, I just sort of got, by the time I plugged in the different meetings with the affordable housing plan consultants and when we might be getting information back from the missing middle advisory group.
Yep.
And, all of those things, it got really confusing. And so I just kind of was like, okay, I'm going to wait and see how, give this a couple of days to solidify and then we can. But I'd love your help thinking about what that looks like, particularly around number one. And, we've talked about, does AHAC, want to make a recommendation to the state around the qualified allocation plan? Do we want to have a role in, should we have a role in the public input plan as it relates to community development block grants? There's lots of ways where, public input around housing is built into other processes that, that currently we're not taking we're not playing a role in. So it's just really kind of finding where those places are and then blocking them out on the calendar.
I think to follow up on what David said, as I look at this, I'm curious and would love to see as it's flushed out what success looks like as we look at each of these, like how do we define success? And I think that's kind of what David was saying, but that the devil is in the details, I guess.
All right, so I'm hearing Babs and David volunteer for a working group to help me flesh out the
I
work
withdraw my
plan.
comment.
Sure, absolutely.
No, I'm happy to be involved in that. And I think for the people who attend these meetings and stay, follow it, all 7 people, like it's important, and they see that there's a lot of people in our community engaged, but we have to think about how we're going to do more than that. Like we have good proposals, the goals, the accomplishments we've made, and the recommendations now in this document. I think we just need to make sure as a group that we're thinking about how to stay on top of that, how to keep messaging what our goals are and how to hopefully achieve some of them.
Mm-hmm.
So I think this is great, but I'm happy to be involved in thinking about that.
Sounds good.
Happy to be involved as well.
Okay, that sounds great. Any more discussion about our report to council for 2024? All right, so I'd entertain a motion that the draft presented moves to council as AHAC's annual report.
I'll make a motion.
Okay, and a second?
I'll second.
Any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, no. All right. Great. All right, so we are on to work plan item number 2 and the conversation around Luigi policy recommendation. And Sasha, I think that's you, because I certainly don't know anything about this.
Sure. So I was hoping to have a formal memo for you all, and I just, this week has not been kind in that way. But I think it's okay.
It's a short week after a long holiday.
Yeah.
Fair.
So I've put one presentation together for all the things. So just really quickly, I don't know how much you all are keeping up with what's happening in specific projects, but I think we talked about this maybe back in November. There was a project, 115 Fairview Road, that was requesting a Luigi, and it was going to council. At the same time, council had heard from Thrive earlier in the fall about their study around city tools, and which raised questions around equity and where should we be spending our city resources. So I had to, basically, or I didn't have to, we crafted a pretty in-depth presentation at council that covered both the project and the Luigi policy and all those kind of implications. And basically, staff came to the conclusion, before we even got to council, or kind of in that, it really, we're at that point where it would make sense to put a pause on this program for a few months while the plan can finish, our affordable housing plan consultants can finish their evaluation of this tool. So, and I spoke with our consultants yesterday. They are going to be evaluating the land use and all our city tools basically on efficiency, like is it a good, efficient use of city dollars, like what we're getting out of it? How effective is it in reaching, what goals? And then the equity, a piece of it. And it would be easy to say, ask them to come up with some quick recommendations on this program and try to move it quickly. But that kind of goes against the entire purpose of the plan, which is to really look at the whole ecosystem of Asheville. Look at all our issues, look at all our tools, and figure out, to me, there's main question, should we keep doing Luigi, right? And if we do, how should we change it? And if we do, how should we change it? Should we be targeting, should we have different requirements? Should it be a lower percentage but deeper affordability? Should it, all these questions. Should vouchers be required? The things that we've been talking about for the last year. So we basically are asking council, going to council, to kind of make a resolution basically so that it's official, because otherwise staff is in this funny position of saying, please don't apply. You're going to put us all in a hard position. That's not fair, and it's not clear for developers either. So we want to be transparent and clear with everyone. So just to talk that through a little bit more, so we expect by the end of February, Enterprise will be finish their analysis of our tools. In March, they will be sharing draft recommendations of all kinds, with the community, and they'll be making, and I'll give an update on the plan in a bit, but they'll be making another visit back to town in March. We'll be getting feedback on those things. And then, so I think around May, we might have a really clear idea, I'm hoping, of what we want to do with Luigi and what makes sense. And then I'm thinking it would take May and June to come to you all. And we need to keep you all up to date as we go through this process, right? So, and maybe some of that feedback happens here too, before we get to a final conclusion. But for if we have a final version, revision, or whatever it is, action around Luigi, we would bring it to you all first. This is the typical process for those of you who are new. We usually bring it here first, then we go to our Housing and Community Development Committee, which is on the third Tuesday. So, and then we, in the case of Luigi, because it deals with tax dollars, we take it to the Policy, Finance, and HR Committee of Council. So it has to make 2 stops before it goes to Council. So for this pause, we are planning to take that to HCD in 2 weeks, and then it'll go to Finance, the Policy, Finance, and HR Committee on Tuesday, February 13th, and then it will be at council that night. In a way, I wanted to do it faster just so there's clarity for the development community, but that's as fast as I can do it. If you all are comfortable, and it's totally fine if you don't want to take a vote on this because we haven't discussed this, and you may have different feelings about this, but you could make a motion of support for the pause in the program while we figure out where we're headed with this policy. So I'm sorry to spring that all on you.
But to clarify, what is the impact of the pause?
Really what it means, that's a very great question. So I don't have any applications in the queue right now. I have not been notified by anybody that they're planning on applying for this. Usually I have a little bit of lead, I know, and we try to keep an eye on the TRC agendas or the early assistance really, or pre-app meetings, which tells us what's coming in the pike, because that's really when you talk to people, Because when they apply for TRC, technical review, they really should be applying for the Luigi at the same time, because it takes 2 or 3 months to go through that process. So I don't have anyone in the queue right now. The impact is it could create some uncertainty for developers, but I think that uncertainty is already there. Because the project, that Luigi, I'm trying to remember, it passed on a 4-3, 4-3, so it barely passed. So there's already a level of uncertainty at council around, is this a tool we want to be used? And that's an uncomfortable place for a developer to be. You know, they're spending thousands of dollars on their drawings and getting to council. And I don't know if, Chris, if you have any thoughts about any of this, around the impact of it, or.
Yeah, I'll back up and say the positive that came out of that meeting, I thought, was one of the conditions was well-crafted as it related to housing vouchers, a conversation that this board has had a lot in terms of developers saying they'll do vouchers, but there was nothing really holding them to it. And so I was excited for this body to have I feel like the conversations we were having in here led to help this. You know, it said that the 50% of those affordable units would be reserved for housing choice vouchers as opposed to accept housing choice vouchers. And then it even went on to identify that it necessitated that this developer would notify the housing authority on a monthly basis of anything upcoming and create a required dialogue. So that was the positive I saw come out of it. As it relates to a pause or moratorium or whatever it's called, you know, I don't know. I mean, I feel like the conversation's out there, and so, like you said, if you don't have anything in the queue right now, it's probably 4 to 5 months before anything would even get in front of council to begin with if it started today. And I feel like I don't see the need for a formal pause, but I haven't really processed the idea that if I had a client come in and say, hey, we're going to build a market rate apartment, and I say, hey, well, the city actually has all these affordable housing goals, and they've got these incentives to help you implement those affordable housing, it changes that dynamic. It changes the subjectivity in the conversation as to that, but I don't know.
Right.
Maybe it's a scenario where councils, they're not getting as, I feel like it gives a developer at least more standing to offer less in that they're going to have to offer.
Right.
Staff, ourselves as design professionals are going to make recommendations to or suggestions to our developer clients. Hey, I know it's not in the ordinance, but you need to come in here with affordable housing. We have an affordable housing issue in this city, and as we redevelop, our council is looking to fulfill those goals. It was always just kind of a tool to say, hey, push your number up higher because the city's got some incentives in here. I recognize that it's not perfect. I thought the voucher requirement did a lot towards addressing some of the concerns that the units were then providing a more spectrum, a broader range of the affordability.
Yeah, I think that's all true. And I would also say if you pull back even further, for me, the question is when we look at per unit subsidies and how much, you know, to subsidize a market rate unit to become affordable, we're now at almost always north of $40,000 a unit, whereas with the Housing Trust Fund, we're usually around between $10,000 and $30,000 a unit. You know, so in a way we get more bang for our buck, but that's not to say we shouldn't be doing it, right? That's why it all comes down to this, like, what are our strategies, what are our priorities, and how much money do we have to spend, and what makes sense? And what I did say to council, because I started becoming fearful that if, you know, that if if they didn't want to approve the Luigi, which is fine, that I was becoming fearful that they would, what I don't want to see is housing projects starting to be turned down, because we can't afford that. Because
Right.
even just market rate units help take some pressure off neighborhoods, right? So, and that can be an uncomfortable concept for some folks, but, and then there's that whole thing, like, this is kind of our stick. Conditional zoning is the way we've been using, it's helping us get affordable units. So if we take Luigi off the table, I'm just saying this in a different way. If we take Luigi off the table for 6 months, what does that mean for the projects that come forward in those 6 months? And it's a little bit of an unknown. But I have seen them, like, we have gotten projects in the last 2 years that are like maybe 5 or 10% affordable with no city subsidy in it. So I think we would be looking at something like that.
I feel like at least a number of those, when that happens, there's some other extenuating circumstance, like it's in a Brownsfield or it's in the river. There's some other challenge to the project that's making it more expensive. Everything's expensive. Everybody says it's expensive, but there are some scenarios where, because of a location or scenario, that things get more expensive. And I feel like council has acknowledged that and been open to less affordability on some of those to balance that. But you made reference in your, just a second ago, about the subsidy amount. And I don't recall, is Enterprise's scope of work, are they looking at what the bang for your buck on subsidy pricing?
Yeah, I mean, that'll
okay,
be part
so
of like looking at the efficiency of the different tools.
Perfect, okay. I thought so,
And so let me just say about this, if you all don't want to vote, that's completely fine. If you just want to give us some thoughts that we would take forward, that would be fine as well. So,
Is there an end date, or is it just when the affordable housing plan is approved?
that's a good question. I have not talked about that with legal in terms of like the resolution, does it have an end date? I mean, maybe that would help, but I'm thinking like end of June would be the latest. Or that's what I'm working
I think
towards.
it's part of the reason you're doing it is for clarity, and so
Right.
you're not just telling people, please don't,
Right.
having a period of time where we're gonna make sure to review this, and we're gonna evaluate the efficiency of all our programs and how they fit together. So we're pausing it from this date to this date seems like a more reasonable thing to get behind.
I agree. I like the idea of some timing around it, and there may not be a perfect answer at the end of that time, but at least there's expectation, here's where we are, right, of status, and say, okay, we need to move the date out to whatever, versus it just, being a pause with no structure around it. Well, yeah, date around it.
That's helpful.
I mean, typically, Chris mentioned the word a minute ago, and I'll just mention it just in a in the general legal framework of a moratorium for anything in North Carolina is 12 months, at least in parallel for other development-related regulations, hotels, whatnot. So I don't necessarily know if this is this exact same framework, but I guess it's a proposed pause to go slow in order to go fast, perhaps.
Right. Exactly. Yeah, and I think you hit on the reason I don't use moratorium. This is not a development regulation. The city's not obligated in any way to do any of this. It's totally at the will of council, and it's total discretionary. It's a grant program. It's not by, it doesn't really, So that clarifies for me why I'm not using that word. It also scares people. I don't like to,
The main goal, I guess, from a pause would to be just clearly to set expectations to developers coming in that, hey, while this has been a tool, it's in the middle of a transition right now. So I hate to, I think there's been conversation as this has come up in the past about we definitely need to revise it and improve it, but do we want to fix parts of it there are parts of it that aren't broken, that are meeting their goals. But I don't know, I'm hesitant on the idea of a pause, but like the idea of there being some way to clearly convey to developers, hey, it's a published policy on our website, and maybe it's some well-crafted language to explain what's going on with it right now. Yeah, I don't.
And I will say,
I'm
yeah,
not sure.
we talked about, like, do you just try to tweak the policy, and that's just, we don't have time to do that, really, honestly. And I just watching this last project go through and knowing how much time the developer and the attorneys spent on it, it cost a lot of money to go through, just because of all the, like, uncertainty, frankly, about what everyone wanted.
So I mean, I guess the overall thinking on a pause is to be able to, I guess, formalize and just make some firm decisions on what the actual policy is for an element of predictability for the end user.
Yes.
That makes sense. Going slow to go fast.
I like the intent. I don't love the optics of taking our affordable housing tools off the table. It doesn't feel like it sends a signal of, that we're serious about affordability or that we want to make this happen. To me, it feels like the idea of suspending this program for a period of time, really would suggest that the consequences for continuing it are somehow, creating greater harm than the possibility of, leaving it in its current state until we can introduce something better. And that, to me, is where I don't know enough about where, again, the cost to the developer, the political pressure on council, all of those, I'm not close enough to that, as close as you were, to really get a sense of, does that create enough of was that enough of a detriment that it would suggest that, like, continuing to leave the policy as it stands right now in place for 6 more months is going to do more damage than, to Babs' question earlier, if there's not a lot of risk to suspending it, because we don't know of a lot of projects coming through, there's also not a lot of risk to leaving it as is, because there aren't a lot of projects coming through, and it has there's less of a chance that there's a news story that says, city council suspends, affordable housing program, that makes everybody look like we're not serious about this, or we're too scared to act, or whatever it might be. There's just, I think there's optics there that I think are worth considering.
Agreed.
I also think it's not just policy. Developers, as they're coming in, are not just looking at policy when it comes to a conditional zoning. They're looking at every project that's been approved up to then, and that's really the best litmus test for what a developer needs to expect is what did the very last project, as council's continuing to evolve, like how they're implementing their goals, whether it be towards affordable housing or sustainability or any of those things. It's like at least the market rate projects that are coming in are just like, okay, well, that project just got approved on Long Shoals and it had to do X, Y, and Z, so that's kind of what I'm expecting that I'm going to have to do here. I have had some out-of-town clients who've said, oh, this property's zoned RM16, we can go do this by right. And I'm like, no. There's this CZ process here, and so there's a little bit of an education on some of that. But I think that I don't think we are at risk of developers getting too surprised, and I don't know that there's a lot that are, I think, maybe some, but I don't know, there's a, as you said, you don't have a lot that are currently waiting to submit applications. I don't feel like personally I'm at a point that I could vote to pause it today without further, myself.
Do you have any sense or insights from the development community, owner-operators, of what this might look like or impact to them? Like just a sense, whether it be like conversations or just something to go off of from the outside?
I don't know if I can answer that directly, or I'll tell you what I do know.
Yeah.
I think developers have a really hard time with uncertainty. And the moving target, if there's a moving target when they're with these CZs and as they're making their way to council, the moving target's really hard for them. Like if it keeps changing, like, well, first it's, you know, want this, 20%, we were doing what the policy said. This is what the policy says, we're doing that. And then it's like, well, we also want you to reserve vouchers. That's not in the policy. Okay, we'll do that. Oh, and we want this, and it just keeps moving. And I think council's very cognizant of that, and they try not to do that. And they even talk about it publicly, like, and wanting to provide some predictability. I think that's one thing. I think the main question is, what's the expectation, and then how much does that cost, and can they feasibly do it, right? So many years ago, when this program was started, the requirements were 5% affordable units. And developers would say, we can't do any more than that. Like, you better not, And then it moved up to like 10%. And then, but the incentive got better, right? So then we're at 20%, but the incentive is much more worth it. So we kind of hit this point where it seems to work for developers, maybe. Some developers told me they're still losing money. And then the community thinks like we're paying way too much money, and they feel like we're getting sold down. You know what I mean? Like, so there's uncertainty from different points of view.
Yeah, I guess to clarify, do you have a sense of the sentiment of taking this off the table and like the?
I don't. I haven't had a chance to. Talk with them. I mean, I did talk with the attorney for the last project, and he's well aware, and he tends to take many of these through to council. We did make positive progress. We also made positive progress at council around just this idea of we've got to increase our supply of units, just generally. And there were nods around the table. But yeah.
I'm hearing
No vote.
no vote. I would say, to summarize, I think this group shares the concern that Luigi needs revision. We're really excited about the analysis that is going to come out of the Affordable Housing Plan about the ROI for Luigi, so that we can make some good decisions about that. And we look forward to being a part of revising that policy. But I don't know that what's wrong with Luigi at this point rises to the level to, for the signal that a pause in accepting Luigi applications would send about our openness to affordable housing.
Okay.
All right, you have more on your?
I have the updates. It's like
you
the
have
next
updates?
agenda item.
Okay, yeah, you can just roll.
Okay. Yes, so affordable housing plan updates. We had our first resident engagement roundtable just before the holidays on December 18th. Andy and Wayno were there representing AHAC. It was an online meeting, and I think it was a good meeting. I was on the road, which was not ideal, but it was helpful to staff and the consultant to hear about different feedback mechanisms. And so, as a result of that meeting, they are planning a visit to be here January 25th through 27th. There will be focus groups for, both like government leaders, developers, nonprofits, and there's another group in there. And we haven't fully fleshed out the entire visit. There'll be several open houses to the community in different locations. So we may do one at, say, Shiloh on the Saturday. So Saturday morning and Saturday afternoon, there'll be 2 different open houses in 2 different locations. I think they're tagging on to an event at Habitat. So we're looking for some other smaller opportunities to do some outreach with small groups. So we're still ironing out those details, and as soon as we have all those, the full schedule and locations, we'll send it to you. And we have Hunter created a affordable housing plan page, and also we have kind of a new email list. And if it's okay with you, I'm going to put you all on it automatically as a side benefit to being here. So, and we'll add people, and then we'll be sending updates out that way for the whole community. Yeah, so
And if you all would look at that page, you can find it by Googling Affordable Housing Plan Asheville and navigating our website. I would appreciate that if you have any comments or questions or things you might want more information on as it regards to the plan, so that I could put that up for the general public.
I'm actually glancing at it right now, and just one quick comment or question. So the Bowen report for the city is posted on there, which is good, and that's from 2020. Would there be any value in also posting the, I guess it was an 18-county regional Bowen report? Yeah, that was included the city, and I think that was 2021, so it's slightly updated.
We could add that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's county level, but yeah. We can add that. Any questions about any of that? Things are moving forward. I think we're excited about it. For our division, affordable housing, I talked a little bit about the Luigi. I won't go back over that. But council also approved an additional $475,000 for Fairhaven Summit, which is a tax credit project. It was an up to amount. With the U.S. Treasury bond rates kind of coming down a little bit, that's probably going to be a lesser amount than that. And they also approved the Housing Trust Fund revisions that you all worked on so hard. So thank you for that. So 3 days later, after council, we opened for applications for the Housing Trust Fund. And we're doing a webinar tomorrow morning at 11 o'clock. We've had a lot of interest, a lot of people signing up for that. And so we'll just be covering, everything we can about the Housing Trust Fund and how to apply. And then we're also doing some open office hours for people if they have questions as well. So upcoming from here, we are taking forward a rescission of a loan allocation for $1.2 million that was made in fall, I think December of 2020. It was called Pineview Condos. The project never came to fruition, and actually that land has been subdivided and permits have been submitted for a different type of housing entirely. So it's very clear that that's not going to happen. So I wanted to claw that money back before we allocate money so that we've got a little bit more money in the pot for the Housing Trust Fund cycle.
So that 1.2 goes back into the Housing Trust Fund?
Yes.
Okay.
I mean, it never left,
Okay,
right?
right,
We were
right.
just holding on to it for them.
Right.
So, any questions about any of that? CDBG funding cycle is now open. I think I have this deadline correctly, but I should check that date. It's somewhere 25th, 26th? Okay. So that is open right now, and that is Dennis Newburn's division of community development. Brenda Mills, if you or many of you know her, she is retiring at the end of this month, and they just announced her replacement, Salah Manaya Merritt, who has been working really closely with the Housing IFA and working on reparations. So that was an exciting announcement. She's starting Monday, so there's overlap there. And then I also, and David, you and I should talk more. So I'm not going to put you on the spot. Yeah. Yeah, I know. I did want to just make sure that, and I'll put this in your folder, or it is in your folder, so you can look at this more detailed, but with the Homeless Strategy Division, they've been working hard at work on the continuum of care and the governance process for that. So right now, they're asking members, if you're interested in this work, to become a member of the continuum of care. They're going to be forming a board and voting, and I don't know if you want to say any more about that.
No, it's the Homelessness Initiative Advisory Committee has been the continuum of care, but basically last year the National Alliance to End Homelessness came and presented recommendations, and one of the big recommendations was to reform the COC, so we've drafted new bylaws, and there's a nominating committee, and there's this membership drive here. So I think it is important for people to go ahead and sign up and be part of it. You will be part of electing the first board, or you could be, I think the HIAC is going to be the first initial thing, but the first thing we're going to do is reseat the board. And so there are a lot of other recommendations, and some of those are already underway as far as building new shelters and making sure that our services are better connected, because that's a huge issue in Asheville. So, but yeah, join, and then that way, if you sign up, you'll get, emails about what we're doing over there.
So that's the ad for today, or the call to action, and that's actually all the updates I have.
Any project updates? Have to channel Margie, ask about 319.
She's not allowed to ask from Atlanta, Georgia. I'm sorry.
No, I mean, just any specific projects that are,
Well, we did have some good news for 319, actually, that DOT has warranted the signal. Like, we got the go-ahead, because that was a battle, a little bit of a, like, the signal is going to be warranted, and DOT is going to manage that project for us. We have a certain amount of money set aside for it, and it's going to be ample enough money for it to the match. We have to provide a match for the signal. So we also got a new survey done at the end of last year, so that it can, fixing some right-of-way lines for that property as well.
I was just going to point out that the project has been officially readdressed as 2 and 4 Johnny Walker. So,
That's
one of
a
those
hard
things
change.
where the project name might be the old address, but just so you know.
Right.
I'll also point out that I know my office has submitted in the permit level drawings for that. So those were submitted maybe in December.
it might be nice at some point in an upcoming meeting. I mean, I didn't really mean to pick on that project particularly, but to take a look at some of the, like, what's the status of
Sure.
like last year's Housing Trust Fund,
Yes.
awardees, and just like where,
Sure.
years and years ago, this committee got a, report of the status of all of the active projects that we had put money into, and it's like we've kind of moved away from that, and I don't think we need to go back to that same level, but it's nice every now and then to
Yes.
just remember that, like, things we talk about turn into real projects that turn into real houses for real people, so like
Right.
maybe an update on some of those
And
things.
things, I would just say generally, things have been moving slow because of the financial markets and everything, but I think most folks are looking to start closing things in January, February, March. Number of projects want to close their loans and get building, so, yes, we can do
Great.
that.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Any other discussion that we need to have right now? Questions, concerns, soapboxes you want to get on?
Can you clarify the updated address one more time, please?
Yeah, of course. This was a comment from our addressing coordinator, Stuart Rohrbach, in their TRC report that the emergency address has been redone for the street that has since been named that they're actually going to be built on. I don't think that necessarily changes the project name, but it's one of those planning things where a lot of times projects come in with this initial address and then that changes. So when it's finally built, it won't be addressed Biltmore.
Thanks.
Anything else? Anything upcoming? All right, well, if there is no further discussion, we'll open it up for public comment. Did we receive any? We have one public comment in the room, so come on up.
Hello, everyone.
Hello.
My name is Tommy Sejo. Some of you I know, familiar faces. I am coming as a representative of both LOTSAR, the Land of the Sky Association of Realtors. I'm currently a realtor, and I am now the chair of the Affordable Housing Committee. So Paul Heathman is also on that committee with me, and he suggested I come and just put my face in front of y'all's so I can get to know everyone. And I'm also just recently took a position as community outreach at Thrive Asheville. So that's the nonprofit that's working with the landlord-tenant partnership and the BRAC, among other things. So I just wanted to say hi, and hopefully I can have a small amount of your time individually, one-on-one, in the coming weeks, months, to just present some information with you about Thrive and the work that we're doing with BRAC, and also talk about any issues that we can collaborate with the Association of Realtors so that we can align ourselves with your vision, and hopefully we can get to doing some good work, which I know you guys have been doing for a while now. So that was it.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Cool.
Glad to have you with us.
Yeah, thank you.
Any other public comment come in via phone or email? All right. Well, if there's no further questions, comments, no public comment, I take a motion to adjourn. In a second.
I'll second.
Any discussion about adjourning? All in favor?
Aye.
All right.